My wife confessed. I've been having an affair with your business partner for months. It feels so free to admit it. I said, I know. Please continue. She asked, Aren't you furious? I replied, No, because your betrayal cost him his company, his home is repossessed, and your sister who helped you is now unemployed. Imagine dedicating your life to building an empire, meticulously controlling every single detail, only to discover the deepest, most agonizing betrayal comes from the very people you allowed closest. What raw, chilling fury ignites when absolute control meets absolute deception, shattering everything you thought was unshakable. Opening scene. The late afternoon sun bathed Ethan Caldwell's opulent downtown penthouse office, spotlighting the meticulously crafted scale model of his newest $3 billion luxury complex. This was his world. Precise, powerful, utterly controlled. Ethan, 45, a titan in designer suits, his gentle charm masking razor-sharp instincts. Meridian Properties wasn't just a business, it was his well-made manifest. A rare, fleeting smile touched his lips as he surveyed his empire in miniature. Mr. Caldwell, his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. Your wife is on the line. He picked up, phone cradled, eyes still on his miniature city. Sophia, I'm in the middle of something. Don't forget the Harrison fundraiser tonight. Sophia's voice, usually melodic, felt brittle, stretched thin. I haven't forgotten. Ethan moved to the window, his reflection staring back. Have you confirmed with the Blackwells? Marcus said they'd meet us there. A beat of hesitation. Marcus mentioned he might be late. Westlake acquisition, something about finalizing it. Ethan's jaw tightened. Marcus Thorne, his business partner of 7 years. Marcus had brought capital, connections, and a ruthless edge that complemented Ethan's own calculated approach. A formidable duo, he believed. Tell him not to be late, Ethan instructed, his voice low. The senator doesn't appreciate tardiness. I'm not your secretary, Ethan. Sophia snapped back, a sharp, uncharacteristic bite in her words. He paused, staring at his reflection. When had her tone shifted? When had the admiration in her eyes dulled? 15 years of marriage, from passionate to frigid. I'll see you at home, he said, ending the call without waiting. He didn't need a response. Hours later, the stark silence of their Paradise Valley mansion greeted him. Only the faint sound of running water from the master suite. In the bedroom, Sophia's phone lay abandoned on rumpled sheets. He rarely invaded her privacy. He trusted no one, but his control was so absolute, betrayal seemed an abstract impossibility. Then, the screen illuminated. A notification. A text. From Marcus. Can't wait to feel you again. Make an excuse tonight. My place after. Ethan stood, utterly motionless, the phone a dead weight. Something ancient, cold, crystallized within him. He wasn't surprised by the betrayal itself. Loyalty was always conditional in his world. But the shock was the brief, searing flicker of pain that pierced him, swiftly consumed by something far more potent, a calculated, chilling rage. He carefully placed the phone back. Then, he walked to his study, pouring himself 2 fingers of fine bourbon. He didn't plot hasty, emotional revenge. No. His architect's mind began to build. A structure of vengeance so meticulous, so intricate, its scaffolding would remain invisible until it was too late for those caught within. Chapter 2. Foundations of Deceit. 3 months crawled by. Ethan became a silent, observing ghost in his own life. He never confronted Sophia about that text. Instead, he watched, documenting patterns with clinical detachment. Tuesday afternoons, Thursday evenings during his investor meetings, Sunday mornings when he supposedly played golf. The affair, he noted with grim satisfaction, operated like clockwork. He couldn't decide what disgusted him more, the raw betrayal, or its predictable banality. In his private office, the files from his private investigator were spread. Photos of Sophia slipping into Marcus's penthouse, screenshots of texts, call logs, hotel receipts. A damning dossier of infidelity. Every detail laid bare. A knock. Mr. Caldwell? Arthur Finch, his longtime attorney and the closest thing he had to a friend, entered. You said it was urgent. Ethan gestured to the chair. I need to restructure Meridian's ownership. Urgently. Arthur's eyebrows raised slightly. Something I should know? Marcus is sleeping with my wife. The words were flat, emotionless. Arthur didn't flinch. Do you have proof? Ethan slid the folder across the desk. Enough to bury them both. Arthur examined the contents, his expression grim. What's your play, Ethan? Everything, Ethan stated, eyes cold as glaciers. His shares, his properties, his dignity. The partnership agreement protects him, Arthur warned, as does your prenuptial with Sophia. Ethan's smile was thin. Legal agreements, Arthur, are just words on paper. And words can always be reinterpreted. Over the next 2 hours, They sculpted a strategy Machiavelli would applaud. Ethan's layered corporate structures, his hidden ownership stakes, these would now become weapons. The Westlake acquisition. Ethan began. Marcus's pet project. I want control transferred to High Point Holdings. Arthur frowned. Marcus doesn't know you control High Point. Exactly. We'll structure it as a joint venture. When the deal closes next month, ownership reverts fully to High Point under a secondary clause he hasn't read closely. He paused. And his home. The mortgage is through Meridian Finance. I want to call on a loan. Arthur removed his glasses, rubbing his nose. Ethan, this is extreme. Have you considered simply divorcing Sophia and buying out Marcus? Ethan leaned forward, voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. When someone takes what's mine, Arthur, I don't negotiate. I annihilate. He couldn't voice the deeper wound. His father's bankruptcy, the foreclosure, his suicide, all because a business partner betrayed him. That had forged Ethan's pathological need for control, his merciless response to betrayal. After Arthur left, Ethan opened his desk drawer. He pulled out a small velvet box, diamond earrings for Sophia's upcoming birthday. He snapped it shut and dropped it into the trash. That night at dinner, Ethan watched Sophia pushing food around her plate. He simply observed the stranger his wife had become. The Westlake closing is next month, Ethan said casually. Marcus seems confident we'll double our investment. Sophia looked up. That's good news. He's been putting in a lot of hours. A flicker of guilt, quickly masked. He's always been dedicated. Dedicated? Ethan repeated, swirling his wine. Yes, Marcus has always taken what he wants, hasn't he? Later, in his study, a text arrived from an unknown number. Package delivered. All systems operational. Surveillance installed. Ethan now had eyes and ears deep inside the sanctum of their betrayal. The game had begun. Chapter 3. The invisible hand. Chloe prided herself on being a good sister. 2 years younger than Sophia, she'd always been the confidant, the accomplice. When Sophia tearfully confessed her affair with Marcus 6 months ago, Chloe readily provided alibis, excuses, and emotional support. You deserve to be happy, Chloe had insisted. Ethan treats you like just another acquisition. Now, seated across from Ethan in an upscale restaurant, Chloe felt a cold dread. Thank you for meeting me, Ethan said, pleasantly, but his eyes were chips of ice. Chloe shifted uncomfortably. You said it was about Sophia's birthday surprise. In a manner of speaking, Ethan slid a manila envelope across the table. Open it. Her fingers trembled. Photos. Chloe dropping Sophia at Marcus's building. Chloe answering Sophia's phone after a rendezvous. Chloe lying directly to Ethan. I can explain, she stammered, blood draining from her face. No need. Ethan's smile didn't reach his eyes. You're fired. Effective immediately. Chloe gasped. Her dream job as marketing director for one of Ethan's subsidiary companies. You can't do that. I already have, he stated calmly. Security has packed your office. Your access was revoked 20 minutes ago. This is because I protected my sister from you, she cried, indignation momentarily overriding fear. Ethan leaned forward. This, Chloe, is because loyalty matters to me. And you chose the wrong side. I'll tell Sophia everything. I'll expose what you're doing. Ethan's tone became almost bored. Tell her. Tell her how you've helped her deceive me. Tell her how you've lost your job, your reputation. Tell her whatever you want. Just make sure to mention that I know everything. Chloe stumbled out of the restaurant in tears, leaving Ethan to calmly finish his scotch. The first domino had fallen. That night, Sophia stormed into his study, eyes blazing with fury. You fired my sister. Why? Because she didn't bow low enough at your charity gala. Ethan barely glanced up from his computer. Your sister's performance has been substandard for months. The decision was made by the board. Bullshit, she raged. You control that board, just like you try to control everything else. Ethan finally met her gaze, his expression unreadable. Careful, Sophia. Your concern for your sister's job performance seems disproportionate. A flicker of unease crossed her face. What does that mean? Nothing at all. He returned to his work, dismissing her. Perhaps she should have been more discreet in her professional conduct. After Sophia left, Ethan pulled up the surveillance feed from Marcus's penthouse. Right on schedule. Marcus paced nervously on the phone. She's suspicious, Marcus whispered. Her sister just got fired. Yes, I think it's connected. No, he couldn't possibly know about us. I've been careful. Ethan zoomed in on Marcus's face, a slow, chilling smile spreading. The man who had taken Ethan's wife would learn the true cost of his betrayal. But not yet. Ethan was still positioning his pieces. The next morning, Ethan called Gary Reynolds, CEO of First Arizona Bank, a man who owed Ethan a significant favor. Gary, I'm calling that favor in. By afternoon, Marcus's personal credit lines were mysteriously frozen, pending a routine audit. By evening, rumors of Meridian-facing liquidity issues, expertly planted by Ethan, circulated among investors holding significant positions in Marcus's pet projects. Ethan worked methodically, invisibly, applying pressure points that, individually, would seem like unfortunate coincidences. Marcus's assistant suddenly quit. His boutique hotel project in Scottsdale hit unexpected, endless delays. Small things, but accumulating. Meanwhile, Ethan ramped up his attentiveness to Sophia. Flowers appeared. Dinner dates were suggested. Playing the husband, trying to rekindle a marriage. The confusion on her face was palpable, a mix of wariness and bewildered hope. That confusion, he knew, would soon curdle into stark terror as his trap began to close. Chapter 4. Tightening the Noose, the annual Meridian Properties Gala. Phoenix's most coveted invitation. The city's elite gathered to celebrate Ethan Caldwell. He stood at the center, champagne flute in hand, the picture of polished power. To another record-breaking year, he announced, raising his glass, and to new beginnings. His gaze, cold and calculating, found Sophia across the room, breathtaking in an emerald gown. Beside her, Marcus Thorne, handsome and charismatic, wore the confident, almost arrogant, smile of a man who believed himself utterly untouchable. If only they knew tonight marked the beginning of their meticulously orchestrated end. Ethan navigated the crowd. When he reached Sophia and Marcus, he embraced his business partner with practiced warmth. The man of the hour. Marcus clapped him heartily on the shoulder. The Westlake deal alone will put us on the national map. About that, Ethan replied, lowering his voice conspiratorially, I've been meaning to discuss some adjustments to the structure. Marcus's confident smile faltered. Adjustments? Ethan, everything's set for closing next week. Nothing significant, Ethan reassured him. Just some tax considerations. We'll discuss it Monday. Before Marcus could press, Ethan turned to Sophia, taking her hand, brushing his lips against her knuckles. You, my dear, outshine everyone here tonight. The confusion in her eyes was delicious, a fleeting moment of bewilderment. For weeks, he'd alternated between chilling indifference and unexpected tenderness, keeping her off balance. Dance with me, he murmured, pulling her gently toward the dance floor. As they moved to the music, bodies close, yet separated by a vast chasm of deceit, Ethan leaned in, his voice a low, chilling whisper. You smell like his cologne. Sophia stiffened, rigid in his arms. What? Marcus's cologne, he continued, a faint, taunting smile on his lips. It's distinctive, isn't it? Sandalwood and citrus, perhaps? The color drained from her face. Ethan, not here, he murmured, maintaining his smile for watching eyes. Not now, but soon. We'll have a very interesting conversation, you and I. The remainder of the dance passed in a terrifying silence. Sophia's body was a statue of fear. When the music mercifully ended, Ethan escorted her back to their table. Everything all right, Sophia? Marcus asked, his smile brittle. Perfect, Ethan interjected, his hand resting possessively on Sophia's bare shoulder, a chilling assertion of ownership. I was just telling my wife how grateful I am for her loyalty. The next morning, Ethan called an emergency board meeting. By afternoon, the subtle rumors he'd planted had blossomed into full-blown concerns about Marcus's financial stability. The board, thoroughly primed by Ethan's manipulations, voted unanimously. Westlake deal restructured. Marcus out as lead. Primary oversight transferred directly to High Point Holdings. When Marcus burst into Ethan's office later that day, his composure had utterly evaporated. What the hell is going on, Ethan? He roared, slamming the door. You've undermined me, frozen me out of Westlake, and now my bank accounts are being audited. Ethan regarded him calmly. Business is unpredictable, Marcus. Surely you understand that. This isn't business. This is personal. What have I done to deserve this? Ethan stood slowly, moving to the bar cart, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey. He turned, holding one out. What have you done? An interesting question from a man who's been sleeping with my wife for the past 7 months. The blood drained from Marcus's face. Ethan, I can explain. No explanations necessary. Ethan handed him the glass with a smile that would chill the room. In fact, I should thank you. You've shown me a vulnerability in my organization that needed addressing. Now I'm simply correcting it. A correction? Marcus's hand trembled as he set the untouched drink down. Ethan, we can resolve this like businessmen. I'll end things with Sophia. I'll sell you my shares at a discount. Generous, Ethan conceded, returning to his desk, but inadequate. He pressed a button on his phone. Security will escort you out. Your access has been revoked, and your personal items will be delivered to your home. You can't just push me out. I own 20% of Meridian. Marcus protested, desperation mounting. Actually, Ethan opened a folder on his desk, revealing documents. As of this morning, your shares have been transferred to cover your outstanding obligations to our subsidiary, High Point Holdings. It seems you signed quite a disadvantageous agreement during the Westlake restructuring. Marcus stared in disbelief as two security guards entered the office. This isn't over, Ethan. Oh, but it is. Ethan's smile was icy. And Marcus? I'd start packing. The bank is foreclosing on your penthouse tomorrow. That evening, Ethan returned home earlier. He found Sophia in their bedroom, frantically packing a suitcase, her face streaked with tears. Going somewhere? He asked, leaning against the door frame, his voice calm, almost conversational. She flinched, turning to face him, a terrifying mix of fear and defiance in her eyes. I'm leaving you, because I fired your lover today. Ethan finished for her. Or because your sister lost her job covering for your affair? Sophia's hands froze on the clothing. How long have you known? She whispered. Long enough, Ethan stated, moving slowly into the room, his presence filling every corner, suffocating her. Long enough to ensure that neither of you will ever recover. Your lover has lost his company shares. His home is being foreclosed. And his reputation in this city is finished. You're a monster, she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. No, Sophia, Ethan corrected, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. I'm simply a man who collects what he's owed. Chapter 5. The confession the Caldwell house became a gilded cage. For 3 days after Ethan's chilling revelation, Sophia remained trapped, paralyzed by shock. Every escape route, systematically, ruthlessly, eliminated. Marcus wasn't answering her frantic calls. Chloe had vanished. Her bank accounts, restricted to meager withdrawals. Ethan, meanwhile, maintained his routine with terrifying normalcy. Leaving for work, returning, speaking with cold civility, watching her slow, agonizing deterioration with clinical interest. On the 4th night, Sophia found herself in the kitchen at midnight, a half-empty glass of wine in one hand, her phone in the other, staring at Marcus's unanswered texts. The soft thud of Ethan's footsteps made her jump. He stood in the doorway, dressed in silk pajama bottoms. His powerful physique, once alluring, now felt like a predatory presence. Can't sleep? He asked, his voice smooth, as he moved to pour himself a glass of water. How can you act like this is normal? Her voice cracked, raw. Like we're just having a rough patch? Ethan leaned against the counter, studying her, his gaze unwavering. What would you prefer, Sophia? That I rage? Break things? Beg you to love me again? I want you to feel something. Anything human, she cried, slamming her wine glass onto the counter. Oh, I feel plenty, he replied, unnervingly calm. Disappointment, disgust, and a profound desire to see justice served. Justice. She laughed, a bitter, broken sound. You've destroyed lives out of wounded pride. Ethan moved closer, his presence overwhelming in the confined space. You misunderstand, Sophia. This isn't about pride. This is about consequences. Actions have them. Yours. Marcus's. Chloe's. All of you made choices, knowing the risks. I never meant to hurt you, she whispered, tears blurring her vision. Another lie, he shook his head slowly. You meant exactly that. This affair was your rebellion against everything I represent. The brutal truth of his words struck her like a physical blow. Her relationship with Marcus had started as an escape, but she had believed it evolved into something deeper. He said he loved me, she admitted quietly. And you believed him? Ethan's smile held a chilling, genuine pity. Marcus loves opportunity, Sophia. You were simply his quickest way to get closer to my company, my connections. Did you truly think it was a coincidence he pursued you right as the Westlake deal was coming together? The doubt that had been gnawing at her suddenly expanded, consuming her. Marcus's increasing distance. His business calls during intimate moments. His obsessive insistence on knowing Ethan's schedule. You're lying, she whispered, but her conviction crumbled. Am I? Ethan pulled out his phone, tapping the screen, then slid it toward her. Listen for yourself. The recording played clearly. Marcus's voice. Ethan doesn't suspect a thing. His wife gives me everything I need to know about his movements, his plans. Once the Westlake deal closes, we'll have everything we need to push him out completely. Sophia's world imploded. The betrayal she had committed paled against the devastating betrayal she now faced. When was this? She asked, her voice hollow. Last month, Ethan replied. Your lover has been playing you just as thoroughly as you've been playing me. The wine glass slipped from her numb fingers, shattering loudly. Ethan didn't move as she knelt, mindlessly gathering broken pieces, cutting her finger. I've been such a fool, she whispered, watching her blood mix with the spilled wine. Yes, Ethan agreed, utterly dispassionate. The question is, what will you do now? Sophia looked up at him, broken. What choices do I have left? You've taken everything. Not everything, Ethan corrected, crouching beside her, careful of the glass. Not yet. I want complete honesty, Sophia. Every single detail of your betrayal. Every plan Marcus shared. Every person who knew and helped. Give me that and perhaps we can discuss arrangements. His expression hardened. And if you refuse, then I will continue dismantling everything you care about, piece by agonizing piece, until nothing remains. The next morning, Ethan sat in his home office, recording Sophia's full confession. For hours, she poured out details, how the affair began, Marcus's relentless pursuit, Chloe's role, the alibis, the lies. She revealed the network of enablers, the bribed concierge, the maitre d', even Ethan's former assistant. Most damning were Marcus's casual confidences, business strategies, leverage positions, his insidious connection to a rival development group. When she finished, emotionally exhausted, Ethan simply nodded, stopping the recording. What happens now? She asked, raw, spent. Now, Ethan replied, chillingly calm. We have a conversation that's long overdue. Chapter 6. The reckoning. Marcus's penthouse felt like a mausoleum. Possessions packed, furniture sheeted. Foreclosure notice. 48 hours to vacate. His phone rang. Sophia. After days of ignoring her, something made him answer. We need to talk, she blurted. Ethan knows everything. I'm aware, Marcus replied bitterly. He's systematically destroying me. He wants to see us. Both of us. Tonight. Marcus laughed hollowly. So he can gloat? No thanks. He says he's willing to negotiate, she pleaded, a sliver of desperate hope. Give back your shares, stop the foreclosure. Her desperation matched his own. Even his slim hope seemed worth clinging to. Fine. Where? The Caldwell residence. A palace he had once envied, now a fortress of doom. As the security gate opened, an icy dread settled. Inside, Ethan waited in his study. Sophia, defeated, sat on a leather sofa. Ethan, by contrast, appeared completely at ease, offering Marcus a drink. Scotch, Marcus? Macallan 25, as I recall. Marcus remained standing. Let's skip the pleasantries, Ethan. Sophia said you're willing to negotiate. Is that true? Ethan glanced at his wife, a cruel smile. That's not precisely what I said, no. But no matter. Please sit. Marcus reluctantly took a seat. Ethan began. I've spent the last few days reviewing the damage you've both inflicted. The lies. The betrayal. The attempted corporate espionage. Yes, Marcus, I know about your meetings with Apex Development. Marcus's face registered shock. That was just exploratory. Nothing came of it. Because I intercepted your communications, Ethan corrected, sipping his drink. Nevertheless, the intent was crystal clear. What do you want from us? Sophia asked, barely a whisper. What was taken from me? Ethan replied, placing his glass down. Respect. Loyalty. Control. But since those are intangibles, I'll settle for watching you both lose everything, just as you intended for me. I've already lost everything. Marcus exploded, desperation turning to rage. My shares. My home. My reputation. Not everything, Ethan interrupted coldly. Not yet. He pressed a button on a remote. The large television screen on the wall flickered to life. A video feed. Marcus and Sophia. In his penthouse. In their most private, intimate moments. Jesus, Ethan, Sophia gasped, covering her mouth. Oh, I have hours of this, Ethan continued conversationally, ignoring her. Quite comprehensive documentation of your affair, including some interesting conversations about me, my business, my vulnerabilities. Marcus lunged forward. You son of a bitch. Sit down, Ethan commanded. With such authority Marcus instinctively froze, then obeyed. Now, here's what's going to happen. Sophia has already provided a complete confession, implicating everyone involved in your little conspiracy. You, Marcus, will do the same. Marcus's face contorted with rage and desperation. And if I refuse? Then this footage, Ethan gestured to the screen, goes to every board member, investor, and business associate you have left, along with the evidence of your attempted corporate espionage, which, I remind you, is actually illegal. What do you want me to say? Marcus choked out. Everything. Every detail. Every plan. Every accomplice. For the next hour, Ethan recorded Marcus's confession, occasionally interjecting with questions that revealed the terrifying depth of his knowledge. When Marcus finally fell silent, emotionally drained, Ethan nodded in cold satisfaction. And now, he said quietly, the moment you've both been waiting for. Ethan, Sophia began, a pleading, broken note in her voice. My wife said, I've been sleeping with your business partner for months. It's liberating to finally tell you. Ethan's voice took on a theatrical, mocking quality. And I replied, I know. Go on, tell me more. She said, why aren't you angry? Finally, I said, because your lover doesn't know his company now belongs to me. His house is foreclosed. And your sister, who covered for you, is now jobless. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the room. Marcus stared at Ethan, his face a canvas of hatred and fear, while Sophia seemed to collapse in on herself. That's it. Marcus finally asked, his voice strained. You brought us here for this performance? No, Ethan replied, standing, his height suddenly towering over them. I brought you here to witness the beginning of the end. Tomorrow, both of your confessions will be delivered to select individuals. By week's end, everyone in our circle will know exactly what you've done. You'll destroy yourself in the process. Marcus warned, a desperate attempt at a threat. This kind of scandal will hurt Meridian. A calculated risk, Ethan conceded, his smile terrifying in its calmness, and one I'm prepared to take. Sometimes, to remove a cancer, one must cut deeply. As security escorted Marcus from the property, a broken, defeated shell of a man, Ethan turned to Sophia. As for you, my dear wife, I suggest you pack whatever personally belongs to you. The divorce papers will arrive tomorrow. You'll find the terms ungenerous. Ethan, please, she began, tears streaming down her face. The only reason you're not leaving this house penniless tonight, he continued, his voice devoid of mercy, is because even my lawyers couldn't completely circumvent Arizona's community property laws. But rest assured, your settlement will reflect the true value of your contribution to this marriage. Left alone in his study, Ethan poured himself another drink. He watched the security footage of Marcus's car disappearing down the drive. Phase 1 was complete. The betrayers had been exposed, confronted, and broken. But Ethan's revenge, he knew, was far from finished. Chapter 7. Ashes and Dust. 3 months after the brutal confrontation, Phoenix society still hummed with whispers about the Caldwell-Thorne scandal. Ethan had strategically released the confessions, ensuring maximum, devastating damage to Sophia and Marcus, while Meridian's reputation was carefully polished through press releases about unfortunate personal matters. Marcus Thorne had fled Arizona. His attempts to rebuild elsewhere were sabotaged by the toxic reputation that, eerily, preceded him. Last Ethan heard, Marcus was a sales associate in Albuquerque, living in a rented apartment. A spectacular, humiliating fall. Sophia had fared only marginally better, retreating to a modest condo with her bare minimum divorce settlement. Her sister, Chloe, returned to Phoenix only to discover herself utterly unemployable. Ethan's vast, silent influence ensured doors remained firmly closed to both. Ethan himself had emerged stronger. His ruthless handling of the betrayal cemented a fearsome new reputation among Phoenix's elite. The message was chilling. No one crosses Ethan Caldwell and survives intact. The lesson had been thoroughly learned. On a crisp October morning, Ethan sat in his favorite breakfast spot, reviewing architectural plans. A shadow fell across his table. Mind if I join you? Eleanor, Sophia's mother, stood before him, as impeccable and poised as ever. Eleanor, Ethan acknowledged, gesturing to the empty chair. This is unexpected. She settled herself gracefully, ordering coffee, before fixing her piercing blue eyes, so uncannily like Sophia's, on her former son-in-law. I thought it was time we spoke. About my daughters. Both barely functioning human beings now. Thanks to you. Ethan offered a thin, humorless smile. Your daughters made choices, Eleanor. Adult choices, with adult consequences. Vindictive consequences, she corrected, her voice sharp. Engineered by you. Chloe can't even get an interview. Sophia jumps at shadows. Was destroying them so completely necessary? Yes. The raw simplicity of his answer surprised her. Betrayal in my world comes with comprehensive penalties. Eleanor regarded him thoughtfully. You know, when Sophia first brought you home, I warned her. Men who control their emotions that tightly are dangerous when they finally break. She didn't listen. She saw only the successful man, not the wounded boy beneath. Ethan's expression hardened. If you've come to psychoanalyze me, Eleanor, this conversation is over. I've come to ask you to stop, she pressed, leaning forward. You've won, Ethan. They're broken. Isn't that enough? Sophia is still receiving alimony, he countered. Chloe still owns her home. Marcus still draws breath. So no, Eleanor. It's not enough. Eleanor's composure cracked, just slightly. What more could you possibly want? Justice has no end point, Eleanor, he said, gathering his architectural plans, signaling the end of their meeting. It simply continues until balance is restored. This isn't justice, she whispered, fear in her eyes. It's vengeance. The distinction, Ethan said, standing, matters only to those without the power to enforce either. He stood, Give my regards to your daughters. Tell them I think of them often. The implicit threat in his words made Eleanor visibly pale. As Ethan walked away, leaving cash for both coffees, he felt nothing but cold, pure satisfaction. The Blackwell family had learned their lesson. In this world, the weak were destroyed by the strong. And Ethan Caldwell had decided, long ago, which he would be. Back at Meridian's headquarters, Ethan reviewed the latest reports on Marcus's continued downfall. His former partner had been terminated from even his modest sales position in Albuquerque after anonymous concerns about his ethics reached management. Liam, Ethan's executive assistant, entered with the afternoon schedule. The meeting with Apex Development is confirmed for 3, Liam noted. Their CEO seemed quite anxious to speak with you personally. Ethan allowed himself a small, private smile. Apex, the very company Marcus had conspired with. Now they were struggling. Their CEO's request for a meeting reeked of desperation. Perfect, Ethan replied. And the other matter? Completed this morning, Liam confirmed. Ms. Porter's mortgage application was denied by all 4 banks as arranged. Her current lease expires in 30 days. Chloe's attempt to purchase a small home in Tucson. Ethan had quietly, meticulously ensured it would fail. Some might call his continued pursuit of vengeance excessive. Ethan considered it simply thorough. The people who had betrayed him needed to understand that their punishment had no expiration date, that his memory and his reach were infinite. That evening, as Ethan worked late in his silent office, his private line rang. A number known to very few. Caldwell, he answered sharp. It's Arthur. His lawyer's voice sounded strained, heavy. There's something you should know. Ethan's hand stilled on the pen he'd been holding, but his voice remained utterly steady. Details. Marcus Thorne, Arthur continued, committed suicide this afternoon. Gunshot. In his apartment in Albuquerque. He left a note. Naming you specifically, Ethan. This could get messy. Handle it, Ethan replied simply. Make sure any investigation concludes quickly. Quietly. After hanging up, Ethan walked to the window, gazing out at the glittering Phoenix skyline he had so meticulously shaped. Marcus's death. It should have felt like the ultimate culmination, a victory to be savored. Instead, he felt oddly hollow. Not from guilt, Ethan Caldwell didn't experience that particular emotion. Rather, it was the anticlimactic nature of Marcus's final surrender. The man had escaped the full measure of Ethan's planned retribution by taking matters into his own hands. It was, Ethan reflected, the first and only time Marcus had successfully outmaneuvered him. Chapter 8. Blood ties. Ethan hadn't expected to see Sophia again. The divorce was finalized, assets divided, him grossly favored, and their social circles severed. Yet, she stood in Meridian's pristine lobby, thinner, hair in a severe ponytail. Miss Blackwell, Liam, his assistant, addressed her coldly. You don't have an appointment. I need 5 minutes, Sophia replied, eyes fixed on Ethan as he emerged from the elevator. Please. Ethan considered walking past, dismissing her. But a flicker of cold curiosity won out. 5 minutes, he conceded, gesturing toward a small conference room. Once inside, the heavy door clicking shut, Sophia's carefully constructed composure crumbled. Marcus is dead, she choked out raw. Because of you. Marcus is dead because of Marcus, Ethan corrected, his voice flat. He remained standing as she sank into a chair. His choices led him there. You drove him to it. The constant pressure, the blacklisting, the harassment. The consequences, Ethan interrupted, unblinking. Nothing more. Sophia stared at him, truly seeing him, perhaps for the first time. What happened to you? What made you this way? Life happened, Sophia. Reality happened. Ethan checked his watch. You have 3 minutes remaining. She took a deep, shuddering breath. I'm pregnant. The words hung heavy, momentarily disrupting Ethan's implacable calm. Pregnant. Her hand moved to her still flat stomach, a protective gesture. It's Marcus's. Ethan processed this unexpected development with rapid, cold calculations. And you're telling me this because? Because I have nothing left, she admitted, voice breaking. My reputation destroyed. My savings gone. My family can barely support themselves. I can't raise this child alone. You want money? Ethan's voice was flat. I want peace, Sophia corrected, her gaze meeting his, defiant despite her desperation. For this child. For me. For what's left of my family. Name your price, Ethan. What will it take for you to end this vendetta? Ethan studied her. This broken, ravaged version of the woman he'd once married. Her pregnancy complicated everything, introducing an innocent party. A child who carried Marcus's blood, but bore no responsibility for his sins. The child changes nothing, he said finally, chillingly resolute. Your suffering is the consequence of your choices, not my vindictiveness. Then why continue pursuing Chloe? Why block my mother's business loan last month? Why have Marcus fired from a job that posed no threat to you? She pleaded, demanding an answer. Because examples must be made, he stated, his voice resonating with ancient authority. Because betrayal demands complete retribution. Because Ethan Caldwell never leaves enemies with the capacity to rise again.
He looked at his watch again.
You have 1 minute left. Sophia stood, a flicker of dignity, almost defiance, reasserting itself through her desperation. Then I'll use it to tell you this. I'm having this baby. And someday, when they're old enough to understand, I'll tell them exactly who their father was. And exactly who destroyed him. I'll tell them about the great Ethan Caldwell, who built an empire, but couldn't bear a personal slight without scorching the earth in response. Threats don't become you, Sophia. It's not a threat, she countered, her eyes holding as steadily, a fierce, primal glint within them. It's a promise. You may control everything else, Ethan, but you can't control what I teach Marcus's child about you. After she left, the conference room felt unnaturally quiet. Ethan remained, turning this new, unforeseen development over in his mind. A child. Marcus's legacy. Continuing, despite the man's utter destruction. The notion disturbed him in ways he hadn't anticipated. That evening, Ethan visited the cemetery where his father was buried. He rarely came here, but today felt different. Standing before the simple headstone, Ethan vividly remembered the day he'd found his father hanging in their garage after losing everything to his treacherous business partner. He remembered the foreclosure notice, the empty bank accounts, the shattered dreams. Most of all, he remembered his 16-year-old self, vowing with a child's fierce conviction that he would never be vulnerable again. That he would become so powerful, so untouchable, that betrayal would be unthinkable. And if it dared to occur, his retribution would be biblical. I kept my promise, he told the silent grave, his voice barely a whisper against the desert wind. No one takes from me without paying the ultimate price. But as the desert wind whipped around him, Ethan confronted an uncomfortable, jarring truth. His vengeance, however comprehensive, hadn't filled the gaping void created by betrayal. It hadn't restored what was taken. It had simply created more emptiness, more destruction, more echoing absence. The revelation didn't soften him. Ethan Caldwell was beyond such a transformation.
But it did clarify something.
The child Sophia carried represented a future beyond this agonizing cycle of betrayal and revenge. A future Ethan himself would never have, having long ago decided that children represented a vulnerability he couldn't afford. Back at his penthouse, Ethan made a call to Arthur. I need you to set up a trust, he instructed, anonymously funded for the benefit of Sophia Blackwell's unborn child. His attorney's surprise was palpable. Ethan, are you sure? The child didn't betray me, Ethan said simply. Make the arrangements. It wasn't mercy. Ethan didn't believe in mercy. It was simply his cold, logical acknowledgement that vengeance, like everything else in his controlled world, had its proper limits. Chapter 9. Indelible Consequences. 1 year after Marcus's suicide, Ethan Caldwell stood at the undisputed pinnacle of his success. Meridian Properties had exploded, expanding into 3 new states. The Westlake development had doubled in value, his personal fortune increasing astronomically. The scandal had, astonishingly, become a cautionary tale whispered in every business circle. Cross Ethan Caldwell and prepare for annihilation. His ruthless, unyielding reputation was his greatest asset, intimidating competitors and ensuring absolute loyalty from employees who had witnessed, firsthand, the brutal consequences of betrayal. That morning, Ethan reviewed surveillance photos from his private investigator. Sophia, 7 months after giving birth, pushing a stroller through a sun-dappled park in Portland, Oregon. Her mother, Eleanor, walked beside her, having relocated to support her daughter. Chloe, working at a small marketing firm, safely outside Ethan's pervasive sphere of influence. The Blackwell women had finally understood the fundamental rule. Stay far away from Ethan Caldwell's world, and perhaps, just perhaps, you might be permitted to rebuild some semblance of a life. The trust Ethan had established for Marcus's child, a boy named Leo, would ensure the child's education and basic needs without ever revealing Ethan's involvement. It wasn't mercy. It was a cold, calculated decision to definitively end the bloodline of vengeance with his own generation. Liam knocked and entered, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. Mr. Caldwell, there's a Detective Miller here to see you. He says it's regarding Daniel Evans. Ethan frowned. Daniel Evans. The concierge who had facilitated Sophia and Marcus's secret hotel meetings. One of the many enablers Ethan had systematically, patiently ruined over the past year. Send him in. Detective Gabriel Miller entered with a confident, no-nonsense stride of a man utterly comfortable with his authority. Mr. Caldwell, thank you for seeing me without an appointment. What's this about, detective? Ethan asked, his voice smooth, controlled. Daniel Evans was found dead in his apartment last night. Apparent suicide, though we're investigating all possibilities. Ethan's expression remained neutral, unreadable. Unfortunate, but I failed to see the connection to me. Mr. Evans left a rather detailed note. Miller continued, his eyes studying Ethan carefully, relentlessly. Naming you as the architect of his downfall. Similar, in fact, to the note Marcus Thorne left last year. People in difficult circumstances often look for someone to blame, Ethan replied, his voice a silken thread of calm. I haven't seen or spoken to Evans in over a year. And yet, Miller persisted undeterred. He lost his job at the Westmont Hotel the day after your divorce was finalized. Subsequently found himself blacklisted from every hospitality position in the state. Recently lost his apartment when the building was purchased by a subsidiary of. He checked his notes, High Point Holdings. Business transactions that affected Mr. Evans peripherally are hardly my responsibility. Miller smiled thinly, a sharp, knowing glint in his eyes. Mr. Caldwell, I've spent the morning reviewing similar patterns surrounding several individuals connected to your ex-wife and former business partner. The systematic destruction of their lives shows a remarkable consistency. Coincidences happen, Detective. Not like this. Miller leaned forward, his voice dropping intense. I'm going to be looking very closely at these coincidences, Mr. Caldwell. Very closely indeed. After the detective left, Ethan remained still, contemplating this unexpected development. Detective Miller represented something Ethan had rarely encountered, someone completely outside his sphere of influence, immune to his money, his power. A man utterly dedicated to uncovering truths Ethan preferred buried. For the first time in years, Ethan faced an adversary he couldn't simply crush through financial or social means. Later that evening, at home, Ethan opened his father's old wooden box, one of the few possessions he'd kept from childhood. Inside lay faded newspaper clippings about his father's suicide, the bankruptcy filing, and, most significantly, a faded photograph of Walter Jenkins, his father's treacherous business partner, who had stolen everything and disappeared. Ethan had tracked Jenkins down 15 years ago, finding him living comfortably under a new name in Florida. He'd considered various forms of revenge, but ultimately decided on something more elegant. He'd purchased the man's mortgage through a shell company and simply left it alone, allowing Jenkins to live in blissful ignorance that his home, his safety, was actually controlled by the son of the man he destroyed. Ethan had been saving that particular card to play in his darkest moment, when he needed the purest satisfaction revenge could offer. He'd imagined confronting Jenkins, revealing himself, watching recognition and pure, agonizing fear dawn on the man's face before destroying him completely. Now, with Detective Miller digging, that long-planned revenge might need to serve a different, more immediate purpose. The next morning, Ethan contacted Arthur with new instructions. By evening, Walter Jenkins's comfortable retirement had been utterly upended by a foreclosure notice, followed by IRS audit notifications and the sudden freezing of his accounts. 2 days later, Ethan received the news. Walter Jenkins had suffered a fatal heart attack while arguing with bank officials about his suddenly dire financial situation. When Detective Miller returned the following week, Ethan was prepared. I've been looking into your past, Mr. Caldwell, Miller began without preamble. Specifically, your father's suicide after being defrauded by his business partner. Ancient history, Ethan replied evenly. Not so ancient, it seems. Walter Jenkins died last week under circumstances reminiscent of your other projects. Ethan slid a folder across the desk. Perhaps this will clarify matters, Detective. Inside were meticulously crafted documents, proving Ethan had only learned of Jenkins' whereabouts the day before his death after decades of searching. Bank records showing Ethan had been in Phoenix when the foreclosure was initiated. Fabricated witness statements from Florida confirming Jenkins's history of heart problems. All false, of course, but flawlessly constructed. You've been very thorough, Miller commented, examining the documents, his expression unyielding. I've been very wrongly accused, Ethan corrected, his voice tinged with righteous indignation. My father's suicide shaped my life, Detective. Finding Jenkins was a mission I pursued for decades. The timing of his death robbed me of closure, not provided it. It was the perfect deflection. Using a painful truth, his father's suicide, to cover a lie. His innocence and Jenkins's death. The emotional resonance made the deception impenetrable. Miller eventually left, his suspicions intact, but without a shred of evidence. Ethan had successfully muddied the waters, creating enough reasonable doubt to protect himself from any legal consequences. In the months that followed, Ethan gradually scaled back his active pursuit of those who had betrayed him. Not from any newfound mercy, but from the pragmatic recognition that Detective Miller represented a variable he couldn't fully control. The trust for Leo remained in place, a silent acknowledgement that even vengeance, however potent, had its natural boundaries. Sophia and her family were permitted to rebuild their lives in distant Oregon, provided they never returned to Phoenix or spoke publicly about Ethan. As for Ethan himself, he continued building his empire, colder, more isolated than ever. The brutal betrayals had only confirmed his fundamental belief. Trust was for fools. Love was for the weak. And power, absolute unyielding power, alone ensured survival. On the 5th anniversary of Marcus's death, Ethan stood in his penthouse office, watching the sun set, a blaze of orange and purple, over the city he had built. His revenge had been comprehensive, complete. His enemies destroyed or neutralized, his power greater than ever. Yet the hollowness remained. That quiet, aching space where connection might have existed, where forgiveness might have offered a different kind of peace. Ethan acknowledged this absence dispassionately, not as a flaw, but simply as the cost of absolute control. He raised his glass to the darkening sky, a solitary toast to lessons learned and prices paid. The Caldwell doctrine remained unchanged, unforgiving. Betray me, and I will destroy not just you, but everything and everyone you hold dear. Not from passion or pain, but from principle. In the end, Ethan Caldwell had become exactly what life had taught him to be, a man who could not be betrayed twice because he never, ever forgot and never, ever forgave. That night, after I dismissed Miller and effectively buried Walter Jenkins under a mountain of fabricated woes, causing his sudden, convenient demise, I stood by my penthouse window. The city lights glittered below, an intricate web of power and ambition, a reflection of my own meticulously built empire. I had masterminded my revenge with surgical precision. Marcus, Sophia, Chloe, Daniel Evans, even old Jenkins, they were all dealt with. Consequences delivered. Justice, in my eyes, served. But Miller, Detective Gabriel Miller, was a different kind of threat. My usual levers of power, money, influence, reputation, didn't seem to move him. He was like a lone wolf in the wilderness I thought I'd tamed, sniffing out trails I'd long since covered. He represented an unpredictable variable, something I couldn't control, and that, more than any betrayal, pricked at the edges of my composure. He wasn't after my money. He was after a truth he believed I was hiding. A man driven by principle, much like myself, but with an inconveniently different set of principles. In the months that followed, Miller became a subtle but persistent hum in the background of my life. My intelligence networks, usually impenetrable, started reporting unusual inquiries. Not directly about me, not yet, but about people and businesses tangentially connected to the events of the past year. Former employees of Daniel Evans's hotel. Obscure records from Meridian Finance that touched Marcus's old loans. Even whispers about Chloe Porter's sudden termination and subsequent blacklisting. He wasn't accusing, not openly. He was connecting. I found myself subconsciously adjusting my routines. My calls became more encrypted, my movements more calculated. I had always been cautious, but now a new layer of vigilance settled over me, a constant, low-level hum of awareness. It was tiresome. After years of being the hunter, always in control, being observed, even subtly, was an unfamiliar and unwelcome sensation. Mr. Caldwell, Liam, my executive assistant, informed me one Tuesday morning, his voice carefully neutral. Detective Miller attempted to contact Miss Sophia Blackwell in Oregon. She declined to speak with him. A faint, almost imperceptible tightening in my chest. Sophia, even in her broken state, had understood the unspoken terms of her exile. My influence stretched further than any state line. She might hate me, but she understood fear. And Ms. Porter? Similar results, sir. Ms. Porter's current employer, a small marketing firm in Tucson, declined to provide her contact information without legal subpoena. Miller is apparently pursuing one. He was relentless. A lesser man might have admired his tenacity. I simply saw him as an impediment, a fly buzzing persistently around my perfectly orchestrated machinery. I instructed Arthur Finch, my attorney, to prepare for any legal maneuver Miller might attempt. Keep him busy, Arthur, I'd said, my voice like ice. Distract him with process. Let him drown in paperwork. Arthur, ever the pragmatist, understood. He's not after a conviction, Ethan. He's after a narrative. A story he can tell. He wants to show the world the cost of operating like you do, above the law. The law, I scoffed, is a suggestion, Arthur, written by those without the power to enforce their own will. I enforce mine. But Arthur's words had landed, a small pebble disturbing the still waters of my self-assurance. Miller wasn't looking for a smoking gun. He was looking for a pattern, a canvas painted with my ruthlessness. And, in the public eye, perception often trumped proof. The weeks bled into months. Meridian Properties continued its relentless expansion. New projects broke ground, new cities fell under my influence. I was building, always building. But Miller's shadow persisted.
He began interviewing people from my past.
Not just the recent past, but further back. Obscure business associates from my early days, contractors who had worked for my father. It was a fishing expedition, but the net was wide. One evening, Arthur called, his voice tight. Miller has been digging into the old Harmon case, Ethan. Your father's partner. He seems to be questioning the official story of Harmon's death. A cold dread, unlike anything I'd felt since that text message on Sophia's phone, snaked through me. The Harmon incident had been a perfect, calculated stroke of genius. A deflection so intricately woven with truth and deceit that it should have been impenetrable. But Miller, it seemed, was willing to chip away at the impenetrable. He's asking questions about the timing of the foreclosure, Arthur continued. He found a low-level clerk at the mortgage company who remembers the file being flagged for expedited processing just days before Harmon's incident. And he's questioning the quick turnaround on the IRS audit. And what did this clerk say? I asked, my voice calm despite the churning beneath. Nothing concrete. Just it seemed unusual. But Miller is putting pieces together, Ethan. He's got a nose for these things. He won't find a direct link to you, but he could create enough circumstantial noise to make life very uncomfortable. He was trying to expose my methods, to show that I wasn't just a successful businessman, but a puppeteer pulling strings that sometimes led to ruin and even death. It wasn't a legal threat, not yet. It was a reputational one. And in my world, where trust and partnerships, however conditional, were built on reputation, this was a potent weapon. The irony was bitter. I had built my empire to escape the vulnerability that destroyed my father. I had eliminated emotion, embraced control, and now, a single, persistent detective was threatening to peel back the carefully constructed layers of my persona. He was forcing me to confront not just the results of my actions, but the nature of the man I had become. I found myself spending more time alone in my study, the amber liquid in my glass a constant companion. I looked at the old newspaper clippings of my father's suicide, the faded photograph of Walter Jenkins. I had orchestrated Jenkins's end, using his own greed and vulnerability against him, making it look like a tragic, if not entirely unexpected, consequence of his lifestyle. It had been perfect, a ghost from my past, conveniently erasing a potential line of inquiry. But Miller was digging up ghosts faster than I could bury them. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was a profound frustration. To have achieved so much, to have won every battle, only to be pursued by a phantom of righteous indignation. It chipped away at my hard-won peace. One morning, the headlines screamed about a prominent Phoenix developer being investigated for unethical business practices and allegations of predatory financial tactics. My name wasn't explicitly mentioned, but the articles detailed the intricate web of shell corporations, the sudden foreclosures, the quiet blacklisting of individuals. They cited anonymous sources, former associates speaking off the record. It was Miller's narrative, playing out in the public arena. The narrative Arthur had warned me about. The phones at Meridian lit up. Investors called, nervous. Board members demanded answers. Competitors, smelling blood, began to circle. It wasn't the kind of scandal that threatened my financial stability directly, but it was chipping away at the carefully cultivated image of the unassailable titan. It was making me human, vulnerable, and that was intolerable. I called Arthur. I want Miller handled. Permanently. Arthur's voice was grim. Ethan, that's not a step you can walk back from. This isn't Marcus. This is a law enforcement officer. Then find his weakness. I growled. Everyone has one. Money, family, reputation. Leverage him, discredit him, take away his teeth. Arthur sighed, a weary sound. I'll do what I can, Ethan. But this man isn't after personal gain. He's after something else. Then find out what something else is and turn it against him. It became a new, consuming game. While Meridian continued its expansion, a significant portion of my resources and my mind became dedicated to neutralizing Miller. Private investigators were put on his family. His financial records were scrutinized. His past, his weaknesses, I wanted them all. But Miller, infuriatingly, seemed immune. His life was Spartan, his family unblemished, his finances impeccably clean. He was, to my growing exasperation, a man made of principles. The media storm raged for weeks. My rivals used it to their advantage, subtly undermining my deals, sowing seeds of doubt. I fought back, releasing carefully worded statements, suing for defamation, but the damage was done. The public perception of Ethan Caldwell had shifted. I was no longer just the brilliant, ruthless developer. I was also the shadowy figure, the man whose enemies seemed to disappear, the architect of ruin. It was a reputation that, while commanding fear, also bred suspicion. One afternoon, Liam came into my office, looking troubled. Sir, Detective Miller is here. And he has a journalist with him. From the Arizona Republic. My jaw tightened. He wasn't just after legal action, he was after a public spectacle. He wanted to force my hand, to make me acknowledge his narrative. I looked at Liam. Send them in. Miller entered, his expression unreadable, followed by a sharp-eyed young woman clutching a notepad. Her gaze was frankly inquisitive, almost challenging. Miller didn't look at me with anger, but with a quiet, determined intensity. Mr. Caldwell, Miller began, his voice calm. Thank you for seeing us. He introduced the reporter, Sarah Jenkins, no relation to Walter, thankfully. Sarah and I have been doing some digging. We've uncovered a rather disturbing pattern. Your pattern has been thoroughly debunked, Detective, I stated, my voice even. My lawyers are preparing libel suits against several publications as we speak. Oh, we're not talking about your recent business dealings, Mr. Caldwell, Miller countered, a slight, almost imperceptible shift in his eyes. We're talking about something much older. My breath hitched. He was going even further back. My gaze darted to Sarah Jenkins. She was watching me, her pen poised. We've been looking into the suicide of Richard Caldwell, Miller continued, his words hitting me like a physical blow. Your father, and the subsequent disappearance of his business partner, Walter Jenkins. We have new information, Mr. Caldwell. I felt a cold rage begin to bloom. He was desecrating my past, tearing open wounds I had meticulously scarred over. My father's death was a tragedy, Detective. Jenkins was a criminal. This is ancient history and irrelevant. Is it? Miller leaned forward, his eyes locked onto mine. What if I told you, Mr. Caldwell, that Walter Jenkins didn't just disappear? What if I told you that he eventually came back into your life and died a rather convenient death, just as your father's case was being re-examined by a persistent detective? Sarah Jenkins scribbled furiously. My mind raced. How could he possibly connect those dots? The Jenkins cover was airtight. Arthur had insured it. And what if I told you, Miller pressed on, his voice gaining a quiet power, that Walter Jenkins had a son? A son who, after his father's sudden death, also found his life systematically dismantled? Losing his job, his home, his reputation? A son who believed, deeply, that his father, whatever his flaws, did not deserve to die in the way he did. My poker face, usually impenetrable, wavered for a fraction of a second. I didn't know Jenkins had a son. A direct descendant, another victim in the grand tapestry of my vengeance. This was a variable I had never accounted for. We have an interview with him, Mr. Caldwell, Miller said, a chillingly calm triumph in his voice. He's willing to go public. He's willing to tell the world about how his father was tormented, financially destroyed, and then died under suspicious circumstances, all while being investigated by you. The room felt suddenly suffocating. This wasn't about legal culpability. It was about narrative, about perception, about painting me not as the avenging son, but as the calculated monster. A man who systematically destroyed lives, not just those who wronged him, but also their innocent families. And this time he had a living witness. He believes you caused his father's death, Mr. Caldwell, Miller continued, pressing his advantage. He believes you drove him to it, just as you drove Marcus Thorne and Daniel Evans. I stood up, slowly, deliberately. My hand went to the bourbon decanter. You have no proof. Proof. Miller scoffed softly. We have a pattern, Mr. Caldwell. A pattern of ruthlessness, of financial destruction, of psychological warfare. And now we have a direct link to your father's original betrayer. A narrative that connects your origin story of vengeance directly to your current methods. Sarah Jenkins looked up from her pad, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. This could be huge, Mr. Caldwell. The public would eat it up. The avenging son becoming the very thing he hated. The ultimate betrayal. Not by an enemy, but by the very justice I sought to impose. My carefully constructed image, forged in fire and control, was about to be burned down by a story. A story that, while lacking definitive legal proof, would poison the well of public opinion irrevocably. I looked from Miller to the reporter. He had found my Achilles heel. Not a weakness I possessed, but a weakness in the very concept of absolute control. I couldn't control every narrative. I couldn't silence every voice, especially not a voice fueled by a righteous anger akin to my own. This was a war I couldn't win by force, not without exposing myself to a level of scrutiny that would threaten everything. What do you want? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Miller's expression remained unyielding. I want the truth, Mr. Caldwell. I want this pattern to stop. I want you to face consequences for the lives you've broken, even if they're not legal ones. And what would these consequences entail? A public statement, Miller replied, acknowledging the pain you've caused. A cessation of these indirect methods of retribution. And a commitment to use your immense resources for something other than destroying lives. Perhaps a genuine philanthropic effort. something that actually builds instead of dismantles. I stared at him, truly seeing him now. He wasn't after my empire. He was after my soul. And in his own way, he was just as unyielding as I was. He was proposing a different kind of deal, a moral one. It was utterly repugnant, a surrender of my core principle. But the alternative was a public dissection, a relentless hounding by the media, a chipping away at my power until my empire, though financially solvent, would be tainted, constantly under suspicion. And if I refuse? Then the story runs, Mr. Caldwell, Sarah Jenkins interjected, her voice firm. With detailed accounts from Jenkins's son, from former employees, from analysts who've reviewed your company's patterns. It won't be a court of law, but it will be a court of public opinion. And I think you know which one can be more devastating to a man like you. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the distant hum of the city. My doctrine: betray me, and I will destroy not just you, but everything and everyone you hold dear. But here was a man who couldn't be destroyed, because his currency wasn't power or wealth, but a stubborn pursuit of justice. And his weapon was a narrative that resonated with the very human instinct for fairness. I slowly sat back down, picking up my glass of bourbon. "Leave the reporter," I said, my voice low, to Miller. "We need to talk. Privately." Miller hesitated for a moment, then nodded to Sarah. "Wait outside, Sarah." She shot a challenging glance at me, then left, closing the door softly. "You're not going to like my terms," Miller stated, once we were alone. "They don't involve money." "I assume not," I replied, taking a sip of the burning liquid. "You want me to atone?" "I want you to stop," Miller corrected. "The path you're on, Mr. Caldwell, it's not sustainable. It's destroying you from the inside out. You've won every battle, but you're losing the war for your own humanity." Humanity. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. I had long ago shed such weakness. But the emptiness, that persistent, haunting hollowness Arthur had also spoken of, it was real. Was Miller right? Was I so consumed by the cycle that I was simply creating more destruction, more absence, both in others' lives and my own? We talked for hours. Ethan Caldwell, the man who controlled every narrative, found myself in a bizarre negotiation over my own character. Miller wasn't asking for legal confessions, but for a moral surrender. He wanted me to publicly acknowledge my methods, not as justice, but as a destructive force. He wanted me to put an end to the systematic dismantling of lives. He even proposed something audacious: to genuinely invest in a foundation dedicated to helping those ruined by predatory business practices, without my name attached, of course. A quiet, anonymous act of reparation. The idea was galling. It chafed against every fiber of my being. It felt like admitting defeat, like validating my enemies, like softening the very principles that had made me unassailable. But then I thought of Leo, Sophia's son. The trust one had established. Not mercy, I told myself. Just limits. But perhaps, beneath that cold calculation, something else stirred. A recognition that vengeance, however satisfying in the moment, was a self-consuming fire. It left nothing but ashes. I made the deal. Not because I believed in redemption, or because I suddenly found a conscience. I made it because Miller had found a weapon I couldn't dismantle, a narrative that would expose the very core of my being to a world that might fear me, but would ultimately condemn me. I chose the path of quiet, strategic retreat over public, self-inflicted destruction. The next day, a carefully worded statement was released by Meridian Properties. It acknowledged a recent period of personal turmoil that had led to unfortunate and regrettable business decisions, pledging a renewed commitment to ethical practices and announcing a significant, anonymous donation to a new foundation dedicated to supporting victims of corporate malfeasance. My name wasn't on the foundation, but Miller knew. And I knew. The media still had a field day, but the narrative had shifted. It was no longer a sensational exposé of a ruthless monster, but a story of a powerful man confronting his demons, however reluctantly. It was a partial victory for Miller, a grudging concession from me. In the months that followed, I held up my end of the bargain. The systematic targeting stopped. Chloe Porter, I learned through my channels, finally found stable employment. Sophia and Leo remained in Oregon untouched. The trust I'd established for Leo continued, quietly, providing for him. I occasionally received reports on the foundation, its work expanding, genuinely helping people. It was a bizarre, almost surreal existence. I was still Ethan Caldwell, the titan, the architect of an empire. But now, I operated with a self-imposed restraint, a quiet understanding of the invisible lines I could no longer cross. Miller, for his part, retired a year later, his mission apparently accomplished. He never spoke to the press about our conversation. He had played his hand, and he had won a strange, moral victory. One day, Years later, I found myself walking through one of the city's new parks, a sprawling green space I had secretly funded through one of the foundation's initiatives, a project that had once been earmarked for luxury condos. Children laughed, running across manicured lawns. And there, by a fountain, was a young boy, perhaps 10 years old, his hair the color of sunlit copper, his smile bright and unburdened. He looked vaguely familiar.
Leo.
Marcus Thorne's son. Sophia's son. He was laughing, chasing pigeons, utterly oblivious to the silent, watchful figure standing in the shadows. He had a carefree innocence, a future unmarred by the machinations of the past. My trust, my quiet concession, had given him that. I watched him for a long time. There was no warmth, no sudden rush of paternal affection. Only a profound, almost chilling understanding. He was the future I had decided I could not have. He represented life, growth, the messy, unpredictable human connection I had systematically excised from my own existence. My empire was vast, my control absolute, my power undeniable. But as I turned and walked away, back into the gleaming canyons of my city, I knew the emptiness remained. The cost of absolute control wasn't just the lives I had broken, but the life I had chosen to live, solitary, unburdened by empathy, yet forever haunted by the silent, echoing space where connection might have been. I had built my world, stone by stone, on a foundation of vengeance, and I would live and die within its perfectly constructed, utterly isolated walls. There would be no redemption, no late-stage transformation, only the quiet, unyielding acceptance of the man I had become, a man who, in winning every battle, had ultimately become a monument to his own devastating doctrine. And for Ethan Caldwell, that was enough. It had to be. This story of Ethan Caldwell, a man who built an empire on an unforgiving doctrine of control and retribution, comes to a close. He found a different kind of boundary to his vengeance, not through mercy, but through strategic necessity. But was it true change or simply another calculation? Do you think he truly found peace, or was his ultimate victory just a more sophisticated form of self-imprisonment? What do you believe the future held for Leo, unaware of his silent benefactor? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective always adds another layer to these complex human tales.